I have to say, it's really inspiring to be here. We have so much to offer in Boston, and I want to thank Jody for creating the One Harvard, which is obviously what the iLab is all about. But I also want to thank Boston, too, because this is really also about the One Boston. And I think we have a community of entrepreneurs here which deserves the recognition of what's coming to the fore and the great ideas that are coming up in the iLab. So thank you, Jody. Thank you, the iLab, and thank you to Boston. I appreciate you being here this morning. So my first role is to do the wrap-up for a mere 40 hours of programming in a mere 20 minutes. So this should be fun. We'll jump right in. The Startup Secrets program is designed as a series of workshops. And initially, I first committed to doing this. I was thinking, I'll probably do a couple of hours here. And of course, as now you've met the charming Jody, you realize that we all get charmed into doing 2 that turns into 20, but we all have more fun than we thought. So this program has expanded, and we're doing everything from starting with sort of an outline of what the perfect pitch would be if you were going out to raise money, merely as a framework, really, to give people a sense of what needs to be put together in a business plan. And then we start with some core things like building the value proposition, and then, as I was talking about, a foundational element of culture, how you do your hiring, then disruptive business models, how do you actually make an impact beyond just the product and technology, and then how do you take it to market, both strategically with things like branding, as well as tactics around, for example, building your sales cycle. And 2 new things came to the fore. We are continuously listening to the students. So this year, there were 2 things we heard loud and clear. There are a lot of people in the challenge teams who are product-oriented, innovators who are developing products. And they want to understand, how do they design a product so that it can be built into a company? So we created a new session this year. It was widely attended. We had some fantastic examples. I'll give you a couple of cases on it today. And then finally, everybody obviously wants to understand, how do you get this funded? So that workshop was also excellent. I'll give you a couple of cases from that. So that's my first 4 minutes. Now let's zip through and give you a sense of what this program is all about. So in the Getting Behind the Perfect Pitch, for those of you who have a chance to come and see this or want to see it online, all this is available on the iLab sites or on my site itself. And you'll find that mjskok.com or iLab moniker anywhere you want to pick up on this. The idea here was exactly this, getting behind the perfect pitch. It wasn't to try to teach you how to do a presentation. It's what is a VC or a funding organization like an accelerator program thinking about when you're making your pitch? And what should you be doing to relate to them? So the first thing I did was to tell a story. Now, why is that important? Because, in fact, all of this hangs together when somebody tells a story. My story was, in fact, about me getting lost on the Great Wall of China. So we had a lot of fun figuring out how the hell I'd managed to do that when it's one wall going one direction. But trust me, VCs are pretty bluntly dumb like that. So that was the story I told. What I encouraged the entrepreneurs to do was tell a different story. It was to make sure that you had a very clear example of why you stood out. And so one of the first things I'd like to share with you as a startup secret is a lot of entrepreneurs come to us and they say, we have to have all the answers. That's just too hard. We've got to have everything from our financials together to a great product plan. We need to know how to go to market. That's not true. I'm happy to have an entrepreneur actually who we're literally just funding as of this week. And he, I'm sure, would be the first to say, we don't have all the answers. In fact, we probably have more questions than we have answers. And that's actually an appropriate way to come to building your perfect pitch, to be very self-aware, to be completely clear about what you don't know and where you need help. That's actually a more helpful place for us to be able to fund you. And then to have one thing that stands out. And it's more important to have one really compelling advantage. For example, it might be that your team has uniquely been solving this problem for the last decade, as in the case of the company that I'm funding today. They are uniquely experienced to do that. And everything else we can build around. We can build how we support them in terms of a business model or what might be the right funding for them. But because they are a clear standout, they are uniquely suited to solving, in this case, a very big problem, it's a perfect place for us to start. So I think the one thing I'd want you to take away, if you missed the entire class, this is the Cliff Notes. Come with one thing that really stands out, be self-aware about the rest, and we'll help you figure it out. So that was that class. Fun this, huh? You get an hour and 2 minutes. Now you know how little substance there was in all of my workshops. The next one we talk about is the compelling value proposition. This is one of the most important things because what we typically hear when we're seeing entrepreneurs is fantastic ideas. And there are so many great ideas in the world, and everybody always asks the same question. If I have a great idea, does that mean I've got a great company? Well, it could be. But in general, there's a big gap between having a great idea and building the beginning of what's really a starting point, and that's the value proposition. So we spend a bunch of time talking about what's the difference between an idea and a value proposition. How do you actually get something to a place where it's genuinely compelling? It's a must-have, not a nice-to-have. And so one of the things I'm just going to pick out here is a small case example of a company that we brought to bear. And by the way, the whole value of these workshops is not me talking, it's the case examples like Andy we've got today who come in and share this with us. So in that vein, I'm going to introduce you to Matt Johnson, who is a CMO of one of our local organizations, UTest, and let him tell you a story of how they challenged themselves to build a compelling value proposition. So I'm going to ask the UTest guys to, again, just give us a sense of this. You guys obviously have a clear gain. In fact, we probably don't need to go through that in too much detail. But can you highlight what the pain was for your customers to adopt this? Because you were very honest about this. Thanks.
There is pain involved in the world of software testing. When we're doing our job well, it's a bad news business. And that means we are reporting 40, 50, 60 bugs on the latest version of your iPhone app or the latest version of your Kindle Fire app or your website. And it's not just a clean matter where we report the bugs and you say, okay, poof, they're fixed. We're actually creating work for the CTO's organization. There has to be somebody who has to actually go and review these and reproduce these bugs. So there's increased overhead, not just for the QA department, but we're actually creating work for the engineering department. Now they realize how many things are actually broken in the wild, and that's great for users. That's lousy for the Fumis of the world. The second thing that happens is they might be good at managing their 5-person QA team. They might be good at managing one outsourced vendor in Bangalore. But in the original iteration of UTest, you had just inherited 35 testers from 14 different time zones. And there was a lot of collaboration that was required between the in-house team and the crowd-based team. And so I think we've realized that early on, and we've taken a lot of steps to decrease that pain. The original business plan, correct me if I'm wrong, Duran, didn't include a professional services layer. Now we actually have a 20-person team that can do work remotely for clients, that can actually go on site, and is actually a revenue center for us. But their job is to make sure that the overhead is what you want it to be. Some clients actually want to be very involved with the testers. Other clients don't want anything to do with it. They want us to actually gift wrap it and say, these are the 12 things that you should fix tomorrow. And ultimately our goal that we've come to in the last 12 to 18 months is we need to maximize the in-the-wild testing that we can do and minimize the incremental overhead. And it was only when we realized that it wasn't just about maximizing gain, it was about minimizing pain, that things really started to fall into place for us.
So this is an example of a case where what was brought to light, and you can find all this online with the full case example, is something that we see many startups completely fail to even think about, which is you may have an incredibly great gain associated with, in this case, doing testing on a crowdsourced basis in the wild over the web. You could save people money, you could save them time, you could introduce, for example, ways to give them competitive advantage because they get products to market faster. You can do many things like this. But there are two things that people forget. What's the pain the customer has to go through to adopt your solution? And it's incredibly important you focus on this because not only is there a pain as a startup being found and being tried, being bought, implemented, but on an ongoing basis to be owned and managed. And in UTest's case, one of the things they discovered, and that's what they were mentioning, is that they just hadn't even thought through any of that. For example, they hadn't realized that they would introduce a completely different workflow that would introduce problems in the way that the bugs were not reported, but actually then ingested into the system and actually fixed. And so they were causing people more pain rather than actually giving them a gain, because they were introducing bugs that people didn't understand, they didn't have any context for them, the workflow of them was much faster, they all came at once, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, when they got into things like the implementation, they realized they needed a professional services organization. So this is the kind of thing that we try to bring out in these workshops is, what is it that you've got to think about? Now, the other thing we point out is that as a startup, the reason this is so important is that there is a huge amount of inertia associated with your startup being a risk for any company to work with. And so although people don't say it, if there's good enough, that's what will be good enough. They will not take a bet on you. In fact, the default is to do nothing. And so you have to get over this inertia. And we point out the obvious, which is in order to do that, you've got to have a gain-pain ratio of at least greater than 10, at least an order of magnitude impact, so that somebody says it's worth taking the risk on this startup. And so that's a little bit of the workshop in a nutshell for you. Again, you get the 2-minute version. So the next piece that we go on to is the piece that I most enjoyed in my chats with Andy, which was talking about how do you build an enduring company? And there's many elements to this, but we reduced it down to 2 fundamental pieces: culture and hiring. And so just to give you a sense of that, what we talk about is this picture of how you may have a great value proposition now, and you may have a great vision, you may even be able to execute flawlessly, maybe you hire incredibly well, but underlying that is culture. And so we brought in another of my companies, Acquia, which actually has the joyous record today of being the fastest growing startup in the software world in America, #1 in the Inc. 500. And we had them talk about how do they do that? How did they become the fastest growing company? So here to tell you a little bit about that is our CEO, Tom.
That acronym is PIII, and it's something we look for in every candidate who is hired in the company, and it starts with passion, P for passion, and we want people who are really, love it. I had a conversation with one of our people on our engineering team last week, and I asked him, he's been with us a year, I said, how's work going? He said, work? I looked at him kind of funny, he said, yeah, work. He said, I don't work. He said, I come here because I love it. And that's an important thing about passion. And for the sake of time, I won't go through details on the other three, but they stand for, in order, intelligence, integrity, and initiative. And it's about intelligence, not raw intelligence, but doing the right thing, doing the smart thing, using common sense. Integrity, because by all means, we need to do that with ourselves, with our peers, with our customers, and with our partners. And initiative, we want people who we have another saying for that, of course, which is ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And we live that each and every day. So that's how we define culture. We use an acronym. It makes it easier, and we can talk about it as a company as a result. So.
Just felt like the right place, right time, amazing opportunity.
I looked at the vision for Drupal and I said, this is the future, and I want to be part of that.
So we're hiring like crazy, and it's a real challenge.
The challenge of growing is making sure that we continue to communicate, we continue to find new great people.
And so one of the things that Tom did so well was to bring out the obvious here, which is that actually culture is not an accident. It comes from the top, and we've seen this over and over again. The people who lead establish the culture early on. So in a startup, that means you are the culture from day one. And it takes deliberate effort to actually establish what I put as the one thing that I hope never changes in your business, and that's your culture. Your values and your principles and your guiding beliefs should be there early. And the earlier you establish them, the more likely you are to have that touchstone that everybody can come back to that will keep a consistent foundation for the business. And when we see really high growth companies, that is there. It's a core piece of this. And so we'll have a chance to talk to Andy and see how he feels about that. A second thing we did, which I'm not going to go through today because it ended up being a whole nother workshop, and we've split it out into a new one, is to talk about hiring. So next semester, I'm happy to say we'll have a specific workshop on hiring. It was one of the most popular articles that I wrote. It's on the site. Had over 20,000 views within the first few weeks. So it was obviously, I touched a soft spot there. And so we've broken it down into a new workshop, and we'll go into it next year and talk about how do you get A+ people and what's the basis behind that. So that's going to be some fun. We then came on to talking about one of the biggest areas of all, which is going to market. So now you've got a great value proposition, you've built your culture, you've hired some great people, and you're hopefully taking this thing to market in some form as a product or service. So how do you do that? Well, I was very open with everybody, and I'm going to be open with you too. This is way too big a subject to cover in 1 or 2 sessions. So we just picked out a few key things. We picked out the very core strategies at the beginning, such as branding and positioning, and then whether you go to market direct or indirect. And then we picked up a few tactics, like, for example, how do you target people and what are the kinds of personas and actors that you have to deal with throughout. And then we went very full on into a tactical understanding of what's the kind of sales cycle or go-to-market cycle that you might want to deal with. And we put a framework out there for that. So as I said, it's a big subject, but we have some great case examples up on the site. I'm just going to pick out 2 to give you a sense of this. We had, first of all, Mark Lorien, who came to us from Spotfire. Mark was the CMO at Spotfire, for those of you who don't know, a very successful local Boston company that got acquired by Tibco, where he went on to be CMO with them in that group there. And Mark gave us a view of how he believes that it's actually incredibly important, even though it's a big area, to actually get everything on one page. So let's just have Mark take us through that.
There's value in thinking through your go-to-market strategy and summarizing it in one slide. So if you think about the topics that Michael was hitting on, the actors, who are we going after? What segment are they in? What is the very specific audience? This play card that I'm showing you is a 1-slide summary of how Spotfire went to market to reach risk professionals in the financial services industry with our analytics product. On the left-hand side, you're basically defining who are we trying to reach, what keeps them up at night, What's the core message that helps differentiate our offering, and what's the competitive advantage that we bring distinctly over the next best competitor? So it's essentially mapping out the market strategy or the go-to-market strategy. On the right-hand side, we'd force our teams to come up with the tactical details to pull that off cross-functionally, so that this wasn't a marketing-led initiative, but you'd get, even as a small company, get people from different domains around the organization, share with them the objectives of what you're trying to do, what are the accelerators and the brakes and the clutches for your business, help people in the organization understand what you're trying to do, and you'd be surprised what creative ideas come. You know, getting these great ideas from the pre-sales group or the engineering group because they've got an idea of a clutch that, you know, that we can help address by bringing and building it into some of the go-to-market plan.
So the great thing about this class, so you know, is that it's full of people with great opinions. And so last year we heard a ton of input from people about, yeah, that's the old school of doing things. What about this new inbound world? Doesn't the web change everything? So we had a really good discussion about that. We talked about how it actually does. You can now have everything as a closed loop, and it's possible to do almost everything in a virtual way, whether it's seminars or webinars, etc. But we also talked about what are some of the realities of this? Does this really scale? Does this work for really large organizations as they get going? And the answer is yes in some ways. But there are some negatives. One click away competitors, for example. Everybody can be compared instantly. And the reality that you still can't forget the personal touch, that in the early stages of building your brand, for example, that customer experience is everything. And so maybe you can do all that on the web, but don't take it for granted. But to just make sure that we had that balance, we had one of the leading, again, Boston firms, HubSpot, and our CEO, Brian Halligan, come in and give us his view of why the world is changing. And if he has his way, everything will be changed by HubSpot.
And what happens is you create an asset today, create a piece of content today, and it's an asset that lasts forever and scales forever. It pulls in customers, and it lasts forever, and it pulls in customers essentially forever. So it's not like you're renting that asset. You own this asset. You're not renting space on Google. You're not renting space in some lists. You're not renting space on Facebook. You're creating your own marketing assets to become magnets that pull customers in. Okay, the other thing I like about inbound marketing versus outbound marketing is people hate outbound marketing. Does anyone like getting called at home at 6 o'clock? Does anyone like getting spam? Anyone like those television ads? Sucks. Inbound marketing is great. You create all this content, and it's rich content, it's informative, and it pulls people in, and it's engaging. So people fall in love with your brand like they fall in love with Patagonia, or they fall in love with Apple, or they fall in love with Whole Foods, these brands that people love. That's you want to create a lovable, modern brand. People are really sick of this traditional marketing.
So in case you didn't get his viewpoint, people are sick of that old stuff. But this is what's great about these workshops is we had people with tremendous passion sharing why they believe things are changing and how they could help you reframe things as a startup. Now, one of the things that I've tried very carefully to do is to make sure there's a balance between technology and business in the workshops. And one of the areas that's been least understood, we found, is in the disruption potential of a business model. We really feel that one of the most important things you can do as a startup is actually to come and rewrite the rules, change the game, create a new basis on which to take your business to market. I'm happy to say that there are plenty of great examples of this in our portfolio and in and around the startups. But we kept being challenged to find something really big. Somebody said, so what's a really big example of this? Where has this made a huge impact on a, sort of a global scale? And so we decided we'd go to Google and ask them. And we got Google to tell us the story of Google Apps.
Google Apps versus Microsoft Office. Office is the dominant product. It's hard to imagine now, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was Office. If you did Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, they dominated. There was no competition at all. So how do you compete with a competitor that has 90% of the market, 100% of the market? Well, first thing is, don't compete head on. And I'll get into what that means in a minute, but that seems obvious, right? Don't compete head on. You're going to lose. So don't do that. Microsoft Office was the enterprise market. Okay, everyone in business used Microsoft Office. So what did Google Apps do? Went in the opposite direction. So let's start with consumers. Let's start with home users. Don't compete head on in the enterprise. We'll lose. So they started in a different position. Free, that's always great. Free versus paying $500 for Microsoft Office. So that's a way to compete. And is Microsoft going to come down to free? No, they aren't.
So we spent a bunch of time also looking at one of the more interesting battles that's going on very much now, because this one of free versus obviously premium is an example of a disruptive business model. And the business model obviously Google has is not selling software. It's figuring out how to sell advertising based on information. And that was a big enough disruption to basically leave Microsoft with a huge innovator's dilemma. For those of you who haven't read that book, it just meant that they simply couldn't come back and compete with that because they would have had to have given up billions of dollars of revenue and profit to compete with free. Not going to do that. So that's one of the reasons why business model is so important. And right now is, of course, the raging battle between Android that Google has got with a very open ecosystem and iOS with a very closed ecosystem, but a very large one. And so this is a subject that I think we'll have a lot more discussions on. I'm looking forward for more cases if anybody wants to bring them forward. Because one of the things that's changed since I was an entrepreneur, dating myself back 30 plus years ago, there weren't more than 2 or 3 business models. But today, we see innovative business models continuously coming to the fore that we think are going to be a big part of the disruption for entrepreneurs to take forward. So as I said, there was a new session this year, asked particularly by the iLab and people here, for the many people who are product innovators, who are the designers, the entrepreneurs, if you like, creating some of this innovation. How would they turn their companies into, their products into companies? So we took a little different approach here. I went to seek this far and wide. First of all, we decided we'd do 2 case studies. And we'd do something that I'd been asked a lot, which is to bring somebody in who was bold enough to talk about the challenges and the failings and failures of their own particular startup. And so we were incredibly grateful to Greg Favalora to come in and do that. By the way, this whole themed area was 3D, because 3D was such a big innovation. And Greg is going to tell you a little bit about how he went about trying to build something creative and innovative. And then we brought in John McElhaney, who's one of our multi-time successful entrepreneurs and CEOs, who built a company for us called SolidWorks that has become one of the most successful both large 3D CAD/CAM companies and then ultimately a multi-$100 million business inside Dassault. So it's interesting, and I'm going to take you through the stages of this one to see how this played out. It was a bit of fun. First of all, we had Greg talking about his invention.
Created this device that looked like a crystal ball. For scale, I show it there in the corner with a Sharpie pen. It would create imagery that looks like a hologram, about the size of a basketball, or actually about the size of a head. And it would create floating 3D images that you could see without having to wear those glasses that you wear at the movie theater and see it from any point of view all the way around.
Now, what do you think the audience's reaction to that was? I mean, this is just amazing. This guy created the world's first 3D display. You could literally walk around the image of somebody's brain and see it as though it was literally right in front of you. Must be a huge opportunity, right? Who else agrees with that? I mean, I thought it was a huge opportunity. Is everybody asleep this morning? There's at least a couple of people who are bold entrepreneurs here. Well, here's what happened. He obviously spent a lot of time trying to commercialize this. And some 12 years later, this was nothing more than a patent sale. Why? I mean, when you've got such a brilliant innovation, what happened here and what could we learn from that? And he was bold enough to share some of that with us. So this is his overarching lesson.
The overarching lesson is that even if you have an awesome product, you really do need to deeply understand at least one market where warm-blooded, actual human customers will write you actual checks that you can cash in a bank. And you need enough money, more than you think you need, especially if you're working on hardware, to make the thing so that it really works well. It always takes more than you thought.
Now, we went into a lot more detail than that, obviously, with Greg, and you can find all that on the website. But we boiled it down to one acronym. For those of you who know me, you'll have heard me say this many times before. I was a terrible student. Actually, what am I saying was? I still am a terrible student. So I learn everything by acronyms. And so this is the acronym. It's trying to come up with friction-free, slippery products that are simple, low to no initial cost, install easily, prove value quickly, play well with others, can be easy to use right out of the box, prove their value in an ROI sense, and that ultimately become so sticky that your customers can't live without them. Now, trust me, not everything fits into a slippery product acronym. But if you do those things, and we have many case examples of this, you will have a product that's on its way to getting ahead of the competition and being in a place to build a business around. And so we took a whole bunch of cases around each of these points. If you want to find them on the website, you will do that. But this is a big subject. And it was funny. When I got questions afterwards on the web, this was one of the biggest questions, which was, OK, but Greg talked about markets. What's the market challenge here? How do we get that product market fit? So we took this one level deeper.
if you're going to go waste a whole ton of money on engineering, make sure you don't just know the names of markets or the workflow of those market segments. Understand who'd be writing you a check, why they would make money from writing you a check, and so on and so forth. Really map the living heck out of this flow of money.
So I still got a bunch of questions. I got more and more questions. I ended up going over to London to do a workshop with Seed Camp because they were like all over me about, we've got 6 startups who are struggling with a product market fit. Help us. What is our challenge? So let me break it down for you. We have heard over and over again about the great things about the lean startup approach. We love that approach. But it starts with this concept of a minimum viable product. And that's a wonderful thing, except it's in isolation to the most important thing that you've got to figure out with it, which is, well, where does it fit in the market? And so what I find happens is a really, really simple thing. People go out and they start to approach their marketplace in a very broad sense. They say, maybe they pick a vertical, they might be smart to do that, and so we're going after financial services because they're early adopters. Financial services is tons of different markets. Is it insurance? Is it banking? Is it retail? I could go on. Now, if you quickly find that you're trying to serve a couple of customers in different places, what's going to happen to your product? It's going to end up with banking needs, insurance needs, retail needs. It's going to not be a minimum viable product. It's going to be a minimal bloated product. And it's really very tough for startups at that point with limited resources to stay focused. And so I introduced a new term, which is basically the minimum viable segment. And let me take you through that. What we're doing here is we're saying, let's find the segment where we can have one set of needs that is the same. So I don't even care if it's in the same vertical. I care that the needs are identical and that the problem and the pain set that you're addressing is identical. That becomes a segment where every time your product is used, it fits that need over and over again. You do not have to change your product to meet that need. That's repeatable. That becomes something that a business can build on. So in simple terms, if you've got a minimum viable product and you can address a minimum viable segment, you can get repeatability. And you can repeat it for the same needs, for the same requirements, and obviously then get what I would describe as a minimum repeatable product. And that is what I see missing more than anything else when we see early stage startups struggling in their go-to-market. So we hope that this becomes a basis for people to pick up on, and we've seen a lot of great feedback on it. I've written an article which will go fresh up this week for one of the publications. And so there'll be a full text on this because there's been so much question about it. We then came on to the successful case study that proves this point. And he proved it beautifully. And that was John McElhaney, the CEO now of one of our other startups, Belmont, which is in stealth, so I can't say much about it. But he talked about his previous experience building SolidWorks, as I said, what became the leading CAD/CAM system in the 3D world over many years. And he said, what do you think this one set of numbers means? And his whole entire point here is going to be revealed in 90 seconds.
I remember a guy coming to me from Detroit saying, I have a really good friend inside of Ford. He runs powertrain. And I know we can work with their data. I want to go sell them. Would you come out and visit with him? And I said, I hope you don't mind, while you're selling at Ford, if we had 2 other resellers in your backyard to go focus on the opportunities that you're not going to be focusing on. He wanted that upper left quadrant. Big opportunity. Well, guess what happens with the guy at Ford? They bring him in, and they love it. People want validation. They love it. This guy's selling, saying, this is awesome. The guy at Ford wants to buy our product. So he spends a little bit more time showing it to him, and the guy inside of Ford and Powertrain says, you know what? Our guys love it. The guys actually in styling, they want to see it as well. So can you come back next week and show them product again? And all of a sudden the sales cycle, instead of 2 months and 3 months, starts being 4, 5, 6 months. And the guys are like, well, we got to get some business closed. And they said, the good news is people really, really love it. And you know what we want to do? We want to do a pilot. We want to go ahead and buy your product. But instead of buying 60 seats, guess what? They ended up buying 3. So what we wanted people to focus on is 1 to 5 seats, 0 to 3 months.
So the 1 to 5 seats, 0 to 3 months was the entire focus of the go-to-market in that company. And John went on to explain that everybody, from the exec team to every dealer in the field, understood that methodology. And it brought me to say, one of the things that I got asked a lot is, what is my number 1 startup secret? It's a very encompassing secret, but it is all the same thing. Don't be afraid to focus. the number one thing I see with startups is that they are desperately seeking to become something huge, and that gets in the way of them actually picking where they start in an effective way, whether it's with a product or a segment or a go-to-market or a business model, something that they can do to prove. And if you take away nothing else from today than the following, which is, how would you like to build your business? Would you like to grow based on your success, or would you have to contract based on your failure? Unfortunately, 95% of the failure we see is the latter. People started too big, too broad, boiling the ocean, and they weren't willing to take the disciplined action to get super focused on all of the different pieces of what we've been talking about today and build up on success. So if you take away nothing else today other than that and get a chance to look at all the case studies, they all build on the same thought. And they help build what has been a constant question I get all the time from entrepreneurs, which is this balance between vision and execution. And I'm a big believer in vision. I think vision is incredibly important. That's how do you go after something meaningful, impactful, build something big. But you've got to start with execution that's realistic and very focused around what can you do right now that makes an impact. So I see Andy nodding, which is a good thing, because if you didn't, I'd be in a lot of trouble. we'd be starting off in the wrong place. And then our last workshop, which again was new this year, was the funding strategies to go the distance. And this again was a detailed workshop, but I'm going to boil it down to something we talked about, which is there are really only two great times to raise capital. And I'm sure you're going to argue with this, but having been an entrepreneur and raised 100 million myself, these are the two really great times. You've either got all the potential in the world or you've got all the proof in the world. Those two times are a great way to raise capital. So to bring that to life, we brought in the founder of Endeca, Steve Papper, who has the right to an opinion here, having started a company that became, in Boston at least, a recent legend with an outcome of over $1 billion. So here we are. First of all, with all the potential, Steve Papper.
So the company was started just a few hundred yards from here, over in Hamilton Hall. And in fact, there's the first version of our product in my dorm room at Hamilton. That's the version 0.001 of our database that Oracle ended up buying. So with that in mind, how many people here were in their professional careers in '99? Show of hands. There's a few, and so everyone, those folks with their hands raised know how crazy it was then, right? And this chart kind of exemplifies why it was so crazy. So venture capital as an industry, kind of $4 to $5 billion a year being put into funds, right? Which is, it means about that much being put to work on a steady state, all the way to, over $100 billion in 2000, okay? So what that means is lots of money is being shoved out there in Series A's, right? So that makes it pretty easy, right? In fact, when we were founded, it was there. It took me 3 days to get the original angel financing. Actually, I had several venture firms. Actually, one of my professors over at school ultimately invested as the third one in that angel round. And by the end of the year, we had a great, Series A financing, and we were off to the races.
All sounds great. Now, what happens when you don't have all the proof and you have to go out there and raise money? Well, let's have a listen to what he had to deal with when he had one customer and still needed to go out and get this A round.
Unfortunately, while we're looking for customer number two, we're on the other side of this macro private equity situation, or venture situation more specifically. What you'll see is, the amount of capital raised, declined to about a third. So that means all those companies that were funded the year before, now, they're, and a lot of stuff Michael talked about was sort of this idea of 18 months. Then, the different set of rules people were operating under. So everyone's looking for capital. So if you thought those thousands of business plans were tough, try standing out when everyone's trying to, triage their own portfolio, and you're trying to find capital, right? And your existing investors, right? They're really reticent to lead an internal round because they don't want to set price. It sets problems with their limited partners. There's a whole set of cascading things. So you're kind of out on your own, okay? That doesn't mean we didn't get help and introductions. I spoke to just about every venture firm, that I could identify over the course of 9 months, right? And, the other challenge that was happening while we were needing funding, originally I had a goal of finding some customers that were going to help us fund this and stretch our runway. Okay, but this was the first year-over-year decline in IT spending ever okay? So this is an industry for 40 years. Spending's going up and up. New companies, oh, I got discretionary money to spend on new things. All of a sudden, it declined. So all the discretionary stuff was gone. And this was one of my, one of the quotes that was very painful. I'd run into people who'd say, I spent $8 million last year trying to solve this problem. It didn't work, but you solve it. But I don't have any money to spend with you, okay? So very painful. Okay, we built a great product, great technology, yet the world had changed. Like the rug had been pulled out from under us. The initial inspiration for our technology was solving a business problem in e-commerce. And this goes to one of the things about the investment community. It swings like a pendulum, right? And it's not always rational. Okay, so for instance, in 2001, what we were told, e-commerce was dead. Can't make any money in e-commerce software. And we all know how laughable that is, but that's what I dealt with, talking to person after person.
I can't help but enjoy that last statement, e-commerce is dead. So not only do we have Amazon here to talk about that today, but actually the public company I was mentioning earlier in our portfolio, Demando, we funded in 2002, and Wayne, one of the founders here, is going to join us later on today. So this is another point that comes out of these things, is we learn incredibly obvious things. I'd never even thought about it until Steve got up here, but the macro environment's a super important piece of this background. Obviously, as he was explaining, in the bubble, anybody could raise capital. In the Series A cliff, I wonder how many of these seeds will get funded. These are the real things we have to think about. So a big thanks to Steve for sharing that with us. And I'll skip that particular piece, basically him sharing his joy of how he actually got the $1 billion outcome. But he was also very quick to say he closed it in 60 days because he learned that nothing good ever happens while you wait, which is a famous quote of one of my partners. So I'm going to wrap up now and just simply say a very, very big thank you to the dozens and dozens of contributors to the case studies. All these case examples, the people who came in and gave their time, they put in a tremendous amount of effort. There's a rapidly growing group of case studies on the site. You can find them there. Just go to the Startup Secrets on mjskok.com and look for case examples. And they're all the real substance of what we've been talking about today. So a big thank you to everybody who participated in it. And thanks to everybody for the ongoing support. We will be starting the workshops again next semester. They've been broken out. They've added 2. So we're going to start with the set that I talked about this morning, but breaking out culture and hiring because they're such big subjects. And then carrying on to the following term, we've added one new workshop, which was by popular demand, which is understanding who are you? Are you a real entrepreneur? Have you got what it takes? Or should you pair up with somebody? Are you a founder or are you a CEO? And so we're going to spend some real time on that because we'll spend a bunch of time in the iLab here understanding that's a question people need to just wrestle with. And then, as I said, we'll carry through the rest of the series. And we did a pitch competition for those of you here a couple of years ago, and we really started this off, and it was extremely popular. We didn't have time for it this last year. People sort of berated me for that, so we're going to do it again this year. Actually, I did one at Amazon's event, and it seems like that everybody loves these, so we'll find a way to do that. So I just want to wrap up by saying a very big thank you to the iLab, to all the support that we've had here, everybody from Jody and Neil and Gordon himself, to all the staff here, and to all of the audience. I mean, we've had a sellout audience. Every workshop today is obviously not a student audience, but most people have been on exams. But it's been a fantastic group, and we really appreciate it. So thank you all very, very much indeed.